So I'm just going to talk a little off the cuff about everything wrong with the Derek Chauvin trial. Because, it became apparent to me, hanging out on Clubhouse, that even though this might be a summation of a lot of right-wing talking points, like a lot of people haven't even heard them, right? Like at all, like any part of it. It was just this open and shut thing that happened, and then like a movement became on trial, right? And like movement shouldn't be on trial. Social justice shouldn't be on trial. Justice should be blind. People are on trial, incidents are on trial, not movements, right? And so if I go back to, so it's when we first saw the original video, I, like everyone else, my first visceral reaction looked pretty open and shut to me. I was appalled. And I think what hurt in the optics in that moment, even more than the knee on the neck in some ways, and a lot of people, I don't really hear too many people talking about this, but it was almost the stance of Tao, the other cop and his partner, that he kind of just had his hands on his hips, like facing, like arrogant kind of dickish cop vibe, right? While this guy's got his knee on his neck, and then the people are screaming. And there was something about that image, right? With him just standing there, a little cocky, like short man, fucking syndrome cop, and then this guy in the back. So that's where I was at with it, right? To be completely frank and honest. Then stuff started coming out, different things, stuff about George Floyd, that he wasn't, this saint and martyr. And then like with the verdict coming out on 420, there was a lot of people celebrating, like in league with 420. Like George Floyd didn't, move a little weed, right? Like he had served time for armed robbery. Like he had multiple felony convictions. He stuck a gun reporting a pregnant lady's belly. I mean, he was looped out of his mind on several drugs, resisted arrest on none of that. It means you get murdered, right? Like, I'm not saying any of that at all, but it just, it started to add a little more light on the case. And just in terms of like, I didn't know he resisted arrest. And then I learned that like, that is a legal, hold or restraint, I should say. And I found that bizarre, but then somebody is used 200 and however many times in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and however long, 18 months. I don't remember the exact, but I just remember thinking that like, oh, well, like maybe I just really don't know enough about being a police officer to know like what they're supposed to do in that situation. And so I took a step back at that time, right? But I still kind of felt like he would probably be convicted on maybe like a manslaughter charge or something. It didn't look like murder to me. I mean, there was conspiracy theories rolling around. They knew each other, all this shit. Or, George Floyd was known around town. Was there a counterfeit bill? Wasn't there? Are they saying the bill's still wet? I don't know. It just didn't seem like this narrative that George Floyd turned around his life while resisting arrest and being on, I think, 3 or 4 different substances, though I think they made a real big deal about the fentanyl. That didn't sound like the narrative of somebody just doing everything on the up and up. But again, you don't deserve to die for that. So all that was, I said, well, let me just wait for the trial and see kind of, how it plays out and what the law is and how it's supposed to be interpreted. But then it took on this whole other movement in and of itself about the incident, everybody else. And I started to wonder, is it possible for this guy to get a fair trial? That became so pronounced in the actions of our leaders, in the trial. Like, first, during jury selection, when the city comes out and makes a public announcement that, the civil suit, they were just awarding the family money in a civil suit was, I mean, how does that not taint a jury, right? Like, I mean, so they're just admitting, or not to say admitting, but usually the civil things happen after, right? Not like right before, and so totally taint, things all over the news. So that wasn't good, right? I mean, then, with the jury, and those questions came up during jury selection, and people who ended up on the jury said, no, yeah, I am scared. Can you still deliver a verdict? Yeah, I think so. It was like, that was kind of the vibe. Like, so you get in the jury, right? And then here's what's really bizarre. We had the Maxine Waters thing, but we got protesters all outside in the street, and you got Maxine Waters out there. It's just some very loose and irresponsible rhetoric, right? Like she's done many times before. Trump said, you march your way onto the Capitol and protest peacefully. And you look at his actual words versus her words, and the left was apoplectic about insurrection and we're going to impeach him a second time and blah, blah, blah. And, and then they're like actively doing that and actively, trying to intimidate a jury, in my opinion, but total double standard there. And to make matters worse, now you got these people afraid for their lives if a certain verdict isn't handed down. All it would take was one guy in the jury room to say like what I just said. You could literally see a scenario go in and go, look, if this guy's not guilty, not only are our lives in danger, maybe thousands of lives are in danger, businesses are going to be burned to the ground. We could render a guilty verdict, and look, I hope justice was done in this case and all is right. But this is a reasonable question, right? We could screw up this guy's life, or maybe the judge will, that'll be a mitigating factor at sentencing. I don't know, or potentially ours and thousands of others. And then you got the president of the United States, this mumbling, fumbling, so when that's already the scenario, and then you got the highest authority in the land saying before the jury was either deliberated or even sequestered, he's out there saying before the verdict came in that he is praying for an all guilty verdict, right? Praying. So now you don't even have the assurance that you have the back of the police because the chief executive of America is praying that you render a guilty verdict and he's not in the jury box, right? Wildly irresponsible. So all of that, and I gotta wonder if he didn't do it on purpose. Like, who's the real racist here? Now, these people, were they trying to have the judge, declare a mistrial? I really wonder about that. Did they want these people to freak the fuck out? Did they secretly want a not guilty verdict? Because all their actions, to me, look like that's exactly what they wanted, or the judge to declare a mistrial. Now, on appeal, yeah, this could get really messy still, because this could very well get overturned on appeal, and I don't think there's any way in hell we could say this guy got a fair trial. How, right? And so that doesn't mean that he's not, perhaps totally guilty, but there are lasting implications about, what that all means, because we've seen circus events before, whether O.J. Simpson or, high profile thing, but it kind of did go their way anyway. But in this instance, God, I just had to spout off a little bit about that because get my thoughts down, because I just, and you've probably heard some of these thoughts. Some people are saying some of them, but, this was a mess, and it was a travesty all around. You got a guy who woke up, who I don't think had any intention of going out and murdering somebody today. And people throw that around, murder, there was a lot of things George Floyd could have did that day to still be alive today, and would be, that doesn't mean that the officer applied that restraint correctly it seemed to me the main thing was the EMT took a little while to get there. If they had gotten there 4 minutes earlier, he's probably still alive. A lot of things could have happened differently, right? And so it's a horrible event, and I grieve for the family and the family of Derek Chauvin. I just think the whole scenario was terrible, but for people to celebrate, I find bizarre, and I don't think it's going to do anything for the movement, or, I think it's likely going to, I think there's a good chance it's going to get overturned on appeal now because of the wildly irresponsible actions of both the city, the president, the talking heads, the media. I think they've blown this completely, where it could have been a coming together moment if everybody just would have had a little bit more respect and somberness for the entire event. But that didn't happen. Everybody immediately got on their soapbox. Everybody immediately made it about their cause. And that is a problem. And then on top of that, you get Nancy Pelosi, lionizing and canonizing George Floyd and exploiting George Floyd, right? Just let's just call that what it is. It's just total exploitation for political control and power grabs. And so now we're just likely to see more of this, right? And I just don't know that they're looking for solutions. And I don't hear anybody talking about that. Everything they've done would, again, lead me to believe that they wanted the judge to declare a mistrial, because upon second trials, we get a whole bunch of ratings again, and we can get on our soapbox again, and we can do this for another how many months. But you're more likely to get a different outcome, right? Because, everybody gets a second try, and I just think the judge trials are messy, and he wanted to get over with, and yeah. But I was listening to, and this has nothing to do with Derek Chauvin, but I was just more listening to people who apparently haven't heard anything I just said, or anything anybody else has just said. They're usually the same people who think civil rights was a movement from like Democrats and the left, even though, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the Democrats, filibustered the civil rights movement, okay? So, and do you want to know who specifically that was? That was like William Jefferson Clinton's mentor, William Fulbright, and Al Gore's dad, okay? So you can't even say there was like some big switch and flip. It's like, no, it's the same people who were like, recent nominees. Hillary Clinton, right? Her husband's VP, right? So no, these are the same goddamn people, okay? And not to get off of my own soapbox, but the Democrats just switched from physical slavery to socioeconomic slavery with their policies and their bullshit. So that's my own view. But wow, that's all I can say is wow. I just never thought I'd see the day where a sitting president would be praying for verdicts and trials of this magnitude, right? And it's so surreal and so bizarre that I gotta wonder if they weren't doing it on purpose to either get a mistrial, to not have the outcome that everyone in their social justice movement wanted, in an effort to incite them burning down the world. And if that happened, nobody would have blamed the president and Maxine Waters. They would have blamed nothing but white supremacy, right? So you see how this dance goes. They manipulate situations like that to the point where there's no way anybody can get a fair trial. And no matter what happens, they use it as a springboard for their bullshit.